High above the clouds, where smiles are supposed to mask turbulence, one flight turned into a quiet storm no one saw coming. A flight attendant, distracted and dismissive, spilled a drink on a passenger, a black woman who had simply asked for water. The air shifted. Whispers filled the cabin. But what looked like a small accident was about to expose something much deeper, a truth that would leave an entire plane speechless. Because when this woman stood up, everything changed. The flight didn't just lose altitude, it lost control. So, what could possibly make a passenger powerful enough to ground a plane midair? But first, please make sure to subscribe the channel and comment below from which city you are watching this video. Before that flight ever took off, Alicia Brown was just another traveler, calm, composed, and excited to get home after a long week of business meetings. She had spent years building her career, the kind of woman who carried herself with quiet confidence, never needing to prove her worth to anyone. The morning had been ordinary, coffee in hand, suitcase rolling behind her, polite smiles exchanged with strangers in the boarding line. But beneath her calm exterior was the fatigue only a black woman in corporate America truly understands, the silent endurance of being overlooked, underestimated, or subtly dismissed. She had learned to ignore the stares, the assumptions, the microaggressions wrapped in fake politeness. When she finally settled into her seat, Alicia looked forward to peace, a few hours disconnected from deadlines and expectations. But sometimes, life has a way of testing you in the places where you least expect it. As the plane ascended into the clouds, she couldn't have known that one careless moment, a spilled drink, a dismissive glance, would turn her quiet flight into a headline-worthy confrontation. And while most people would have just wiped the stain and stayed silent, Alicia was about to prove that silence was no longer an option. The flight had leveled off, and the cabin hummed with quiet conversations and the low whir of engines. Alicia leaned back, finally beginning to relax. When the flight attendant approached, Alicia smiled politely and asked for a glass of water, nothing more. The attendant nodded but returned minutes later with a tray of drinks meant for another row. In the shuffle, a cup tipped, sending a splash of sticky orange liquid across Alicia's blouse and laptop. The attendant gasped, then laughed awkwardly. "Guess you'll have to deal with it," she muttered under her breath, loud enough for the nearby passengers to hear. A few chuckled. Others turned away, pretending not to notice. Alicia sat frozen for a moment, feeling the cold liquid seep through her shirt and the sting of humiliation far deeper than the spill itself. She calmly asked for napkins, but the attendant rolled her eyes and said she'd get to it when she could. Then she walked away. The air grew heavier. The people in her row exchanged glances, but said nothing. Alicia felt that familiar ache, the same one that came every time she was made to feel small, invisible, or too much. She wasn't angry about the spill. She was angry about the disrespect that came after. About how quickly dignity could be dismissed when the person holding it looked like her. Minutes passed, but no one came back. Alicia pressed the call button. The light above her head blinked. Another attendant walked by, glanced at it, and kept moving. It was as if she wasn't even there. That's when a man 2 rows ahead turned and whispered, "Maybe just let it go." The words hit her like a gust of cold air. She wasn't the one who caused a scene, but she was the one being told not to make one. Something inside her shifted. This wasn't going to be another quiet moment of endurance. Not this time. Alicia stood up, her soaked blouse clinging to her skin. Calmly, she called out to the attendant who had spilled the drink. The woman turned, irritation flashing in her eyes, as if she were the one being inconvenienced. Alicia explained what had happened and asked, again, for assistance. The attendant sighed dramatically and snapped, "Ma'am, you need to sit down before you disturb the other passengers." Heads began to turn. Whispers rippled through the cabin. Alicia could feel every eye on her, not as support, but as suspicion. The story was already being written without her. Angry black woman causes trouble on a plane. And that's when the tone changed. The attendant, visibly frustrated, leaned toward a colleague and muttered something that made them both smirk. Alicia didn't hear the words clearly, but she didn't have to. The insult, quiet, coded, and sharp, was aimed to humiliate. The laughter stung worse than the spill. Alicia took a deep breath and sat down, her hands trembling, heart racing. But beneath the shaking was a steady pulse of resolve. She opened her phone, started documenting everything, the time, the behavior, the witnesses. The attendants noticed. One of them approached, eyes narrowed, and warned her about recording on a federal aircraft. That's when Alicia calmly looked her in the eye and said, "Then call your captain. We'll handle it together." The smirk vanished. The attendant hesitated, then walked briskly toward the cockpit. The plane, once calm, now buzzed with tension. No one knew what would happen next, but Alicia did. Because sometimes, standing up for yourself doesn't mean shouting. It means making sure the world finally pays attention, even if it takes grounding the plane to do it. The captain's voice broke through the tense silence, calm but edged with authority. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We're experiencing a situation that requires immediate attention. A ripple of confusion spread through the cabin. Passengers exchanged uneasy looks, unsure what situation meant, but Alicia knew. Her complaint had reached the front of the plane. Moments later, the flight attendant returned, no longer smirking. Her voice was tight, her confidence cracked. "The captain would like to speak with you, ma'am." Every eye followed Alicia as she stood, her stained blouse a quiet testament to what had happened. Each step down the narrow aisle felt like walking through judgment, whispers trailing her like shadows. Inside the cockpit area, the captain's expression was serious but guarded. "There seems to be a misunderstanding," he said carefully. "My crew mentioned some disruption." Alicia met his gaze, steady and unflinching, and explained everything: the spill, the laughter, the disregard. The more she spoke, the more the captain's composure shifted from skepticism to discomfort. Passengers had begun recording, murmurs spreading like wildfire. Then, in a move that stunned everyone, the captain picked up the intercom and announced, "For the safety and integrity of this flight, we are returning to the gate." Gasps filled the cabin. The plane, just an hour into its journey, began to descend. The attendants' faces went pale. Alicia didn't cheer, didn't gloat. She sat quietly, hands clasped, as the reality sank in. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't demanded revenge. She had simply refused to be invisible. As the wheels touched the runway, the tension broke into a stunned silence. One passenger whispered, "She really grounded the plane." And in that heavy, motionless moment, every person on board understood something they hadn't before: that dignity, once dismissed, can shake the sky itself. But Alicia wasn't finished yet, because grounding the plane was only the beginning of what came next. When the plane finally reached the gate, the silence was deafening. No one moved, no one spoke. The flight attendants who once laughed now avoided eye contact, their confidence shattered by the gravity of what had unfolded. Airport security and airline supervisors boarded quickly, pulling Alicia aside to discuss the situation. But this time, she wasn't walking in as a victim. She was walking in as a woman who had been seen. She calmly explained every detail, backed by passengers who had recorded the incident. One by one, witnesses came forward. Their videos told the truth that words alone could not: the dismissiveness, the ridicule, the arrogance that turned a simple mistake into humiliation. The airline issued an apology that same evening. The attendant was suspended pending investigation. And Alicia, though exhausted, knew this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every moment people like her were told to let it go, every quiet injustice swept under the rug to keep others comfortable. She returned home that night to hundreds of messages, some from strangers who'd seen the story online, thanking her for standing her ground. Others shared their own experiences, stories of bias and silence carried for years. Alicia hadn't planned to make headlines. She just wanted respect. But sometimes it takes one person's calm defiance to remind the world that equality isn't optional, it's owed. As she looked out her window the next morning, watching another plane slice through the dawn sky, she wondered how many others are still enduring the same quiet battles, unseen, unheard, unacknowledged. And maybe that's the question we should all be asking ourselves. Because injustice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers through everyday moments until someone finally decides to speak louder. Would you have stayed silent, or would you have stood up like Alicia?